So the parasha itself, Ki Tavo, has two major kind of parts to it. The first is the what's known as the first fruits ceremony, which I'll explain in a bit. And the second, which consists of what we would read or will read today, is what's known as the blessings and curses. And so the people stand on two mountains, 6 tribes on one mountain and 6 tribes on the other, and they go through this covenant ceremony. You know, curse be the person who does this thing, that thing, the other thing. V'amar kol ha'am amen. All the people answer amen. And if you look at that list, these are all things that are done in secret. Okay, like moving your neighbor's landmark, or having sex with your mother-in-law, which, you know, I have to say that's not a desire I've ever had, or your stepmother or whatever. You know, but these are things that it would be very, very hard to catch you doing, although this was also before the age of, you know, security cameras and so on and so forth. And then we have this very long reading, even in the triennial cycle. It's 55 verses, known as the Tochacha, the rebuke. And it talks about all of the things that will happen if we don't obey the covenant. And but what I want to talk about in my drasha this morning is the first part. All right, so this is a joke which you're probably familiar with, right? But there is a 3-part description of almost every Jewish holiday, right? They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat, right? I mean, it's not true of the high holidays, but it is true of, let's say, Pesach, right? They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat matzah, right? Purim, they tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat Hanukkah. Hanukkah, they tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat latkes or jelly donuts, right? But I think maybe, you know, the origin of that pattern is in our Parsha today, right? So at the beginning of the Parsha, it says, and I spoke about this a little bit last night, I took it in a different direction, but the Parsha says when you come into the land and you've planted orchards and vineyards, then you should bring the first fruits in a basket to the priest who will be in that day in the place which I shall appoint, which is understood to be Jerusalem, and you shall engage in a ritual recitation, the words of which are found at the beginning of the Parsha. Okay, and this is, you know, one of those things that is fairly rare. I mean, there are plenty of places in the Torah where it says you should pray, right? There aren't too many places where it tells you what the words of the prayer actually are, right? We have the Jacob's blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh, and we have the Birkat Kohanim, and we have this, which forms the heart of the Haggadah, right? The narrative section of the Haggadah, Arami Oved Avi. A wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there and became a great nation, and the Egyptians oppressed us, and so on and so forth, right? And we know the history, right? We know the history because it's like, it's really the master narrative of our tradition, right? And then it continues, now that you, God, have brought us to this land flowing with milk and honey, I have brought you these sanctified fruits. Look down from your heavenly abode and bless your people Israel. All right, so there are, if I look at this recitation and I say, what are the themes in this recitation? I think that there are four: history, action, gratitude, and community. Right? I'll say that again: history, action, gratitude, community. Right? And it's almost really a program for Jewish survival. Right? If you think about it. Right? History. We need to remind ourselves where we came from, who our ancestors were, what they did, and what they went through. Right? And that is sort of core, but it's not enough. Right? Being Jewish is not ancestor worship, and it's not enough to simply remember our past. Right? And I have to say, and every rabbi will tell you the same thing. Right? The number of people who tell you, oh, my grandfather was a very Orthodox rabbi. Right? They had lots of Orthodox rabbis 2 generations ago, apparently, right? Or you could talk about kashrut, and they'll say, well, I don't keep kosher, but my grandparents. Okay, well, mazel tov to your grandparents, I mean, or, I don't do anything Jewish, but my grandparents were very religious. Well, that's, I'm sorry, but that's not enough, right? Being Jewish isn't ancestor worship. And it's not simply remembering our past, right? Because the Jewish past is not enough. We need a Jewish present, right? And if we don't have a Jewish present, we won't have a Jewish future, right? So we plant and we bring our first fruits to the temple. Right, so that's the action part: history, then action, right? And then gratitude. We work hard for what we have, but we remember that everything we have ultimately comes from God, right? And this is really hard, right? This is really hard because it's so, I think, it's so unnatural. Right? Either we look back, we look at what we have and we say, I have this because I'm so smart, or I have this because I work so hard, right? Or else we say, we'll just rely on God. There is a certain religious type that simply says, rely on God, right? I mean, we saw this at the height of the pandemic, right? When, and this was not really in the Jewish community, right? This was not really in the Jewish community, but people in, evangelical church, we don't need mass and we don't need social distancing because God will protect us, right? But God says, frankly, God says, don't be an idiot, right? Nishmartem ma'od al nafshotecha. Take good care of yourselves, right? And so but I have to say, I think some of you have heard me tell this story before. When I was leaving Charlottesville, I was the Hillel director in Charlottesville, and I was transferred here to DC. And they were interviewing for my successor, and one of the candidates was an Orthodox rabbi, a kind of black hat type of Orthodox rabbi. And I picked him up at the airport, and we got into my car, and this was before seatbelt laws were common, right? We got into my car, and I said, please put on your seatbelt. And he said, I don't wear seatbelts. He said, my Rebbe says that wearing a seatbelt shows a lack of trust in God. And I said, I trust God. I don't trust the other drivers. Right? And you are absolutely free to not wear a seatbelt, but this car is not moving until you put the seatbelt on. Okay? Put the seatbelt on. Right? Because it's not, I mean, frankly, you know, and I really think I try to be respectful of other religious perspectives, right? But I'm not going to wear a seatbelt because it shows a lack of trust in God. It's not just a different religious perspective. It's dumb. It's dumb, okay? And, you know, so this idea that I work hard and I do what I have to do because God's not going to do it for me, but I didn't do it all by myself either. It comes from God. That is, I think that is not psychologically a natural disposition. We actually have to train ourselves to believe that, right? But because everything comes from God, we are obligated to share it with the others who have less, right? I mean, specifically in this case, in the Parsha, with the Leviim, the Levites, who don't have a share in the land, right? Because the land was divvied up to all the tribes, but the Levites didn't get a share of the land, right? Because they had a specific task in the temple, so they couldn't be farmers, they couldn't be merchants, and therefore the rest of Israel had to support them, right? And not only the ger, not only the lady, but the ger, yatom, va'almanah, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, right? The stranger, the orphan, and the widow, who God has special care for because, you know, in a patriarchal society, they don't have a clan head who's going to take care of them anymore. So, right? So we are obligated, and I think about those people on Martha's Vineyard, right? Who I don't even want to, because it makes me cry. It really makes me cry thinking about not only, but that the cruelty is exactly the point. The cruelty is exactly the point. And these people call themselves Christians, right? They call themselves Christians, which is just to me unbelievable, right? So history, action, gratitude, and community, right? So, right, because it would be very natural. The reading says, "Dear God, look down from your holy abode and bless me." Right? Look down from your holy abode and bless me and my family. Right? But that's not what it says. It says, look down from your holy abode and bless your people Israel. Right? That community, right, is the key part, right? And if you look at the liturgy, right, the liturgy is almost entirely in the plural, right? Look at almost any prayer, right? Look at the liturgy of the high holidays. Al hatanu lefanech, right? For the sin which we have sinned before you, right? Or Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Okay, whether those metaphors work for you or not the point here, right? They're in the plural, right? Or Eloheinu ve'Elohei, right? Our God and the God of our ancestors. All of our prayers are in the plural, right? We don't ask for things for ourselves. We ask for things for, either all Israel or for all the world, right? And this is a challenge in American society, which is so individualistic, right? Tell people, do this for the good of the community, right? Tell people, do this for the good of the community, right? You're in a crowded room, you don't want to wear a mask, do it for the good of the community, right? A decision has been made in your house of worship that you don't like, go along with it because it's good for the community, right? I mean, the number of people who say, well, if you do X, Y, or Z, I'm quitting, right? I mean, you know, to me, you throw in your lot with a community and you work hard to make that community the best that it can be. But you're part of a community, and that you know, heightened individualism of American society, I think, is something very, very countercultural, right? And it's not just in Judaism, right? The religious sociologist Robert Bellow, in a book called Habits of the Heart, right? He came up with the term sovereign self, right? That especially in matters of religion, people feel that they have a sovereign self, right? That they have the right to make their own decisions, right? And in any traditional religion, this is really a challenge, right? Because Judaism is certainly less hierarchical than, let's say, Roman Catholicism, right? But there are certain things that either the rabbi of the shul decides or the law committee decides or whatever, and not the individual, right? And it is a challenge to maintain a community when you have the pull of these different directions. And this is especially, I think, a challenge for conservative Judaism. I just want to wind up with one last thought. I mean, in many talks and sermons that I have given, I have said that this challenge is most acute for conservative Judaism and modern Orthodoxy, right? And even though there are huge differences between conservative Judaism and modern Orthodoxy, I put them in the same basket as religious groups that say that you can be fully Jewish and fully American, that you can participate in American society in it completely without giving up any of your Judaism, right? As opposed to Haredi black hat Judaism, which basically they are in America but not of America, right? We saw this in the time, right? They relate to the US government as this foreign entity that, can either be obeyed or evaded, but it's not something that I'm really part of, right? And conversely, I think forms of Judaism that are more liberal than us, if there's a challenge between participation in American society and being fully Jewish, right, they choose America, right? Whereas, modern Orthodoxy as well as conservative Judaism say, no, we have to meet that challenge head on, and there are challenges, but there are no contradictions. However, I wrote in my update yesterday about Yeshiva University and the Why You Cried alliance, right? And how the Supreme Court had denied them a stay of the New York court's order that they had to recognize the club, actually, apparently, on an equal basis with all other clubs, right? Well, I don't know, I realize that probably nobody else here today follows this quite as avidly as I do, but late yesterday afternoon, Yeshiva University, right? And I mean, in a way, I have to give them credit, right? Because if you're a rabbi, you learn to read text very closely, right? And the ruling was you have to treat the YU Pride Alliance the same way you treat all other clubs. So Alan, I see you smile. Do you know why you did?
Sure, that way, yeah, no, I didn't read that, you are right. But if you do that, then you don't have to fund anybody. You can still do what you want with the gay alliance, but it endures the detriment of everybody else.
And that's exactly what they did. No more clubs. Okay, if we have to treat the Pride Alliance the same way we treat all the other clubs, no more clubs. No more clubs. Okay, which is precisely what what municipalities did in the South in the 60s, right? If we can't have segregated swimming pools, no more swimming pools, right? If we can't have segregated schools, segregated public schools, no more public. Now they're saying this is until the court rules, and then we'll figure out what to do, right? But it's also, I mean, to me, it is an attempt to pit straight students against gay students, right? Because if you are in the, I don't know, the geology club or whatever, you say, oh, because of those gays, we don't have a club, right? I actually don't think it will work, right? But the idea that, what I'm saying is that because it is a complete, in my mind, a complete abdication of the modern Orthodox project, really, which says that, I mean, the joke is, right, like there are certain terms that are oxymorons, right? Like military intelligence, right? And that yeshiva university is an oxymoron, right? Because you can either be a yeshiva or a university, right? I mean, people also said that Catholic university is an oxymoron, right? But yeshiva university has really shown that it does, at this point, that it doesn't want to be a university, that it wants to be a yeshiva with secular studies and not a full university. Okay, so we still don't have 10, unfortunately. But if there are any questions or comments, please hop in. Anyone? Bueller? Okay. We'll pause for a second while the camera is taken off.